Hello and welcome back. Today I'm going to be showing you how to do approach grafting on this Trident maple. If you find the following content helpful, then you can thank me by clicking the thanks button just below the video. The subject of today's workshop, this Trident maple, is a tree that I field grew, and in spring, a season ago, I collected it, and that was featured in a video that I also posted on my channel, which I will link to now. And as you can see, it's developed very strongly since then, and it's now once again sort of middle spring, and it's a good time to do the work that I want to demonstrate to you. This is the apical area. I cut the trunk at this point, and as you can see, there is quite a fair amount of growth in this area, but the highest point is at the back of the tree. So that's not of any use to me. And the position of these branches here are to the left, which is then going to, if I continue to develop the trunk line in that direction, there's going to be no change in direction from the direction that the trunk is already moving in. So I actually want to get change the trunk direction to the right. And this branch that is lower down here is not ideally positioned. It's a little bit too low down. I would lose all of this. You can see how the sap is receded over here, and which proves my point that there's no sense in shaping these sort of trunk chops until you actually know where the new sap flow has been established. But now this is very clear. And so the main the most important graft that I want to do today is to graft something into this space, so that I can have something coming out the front of the tree and growing in the direction that I want. Our main graft is going to be in this sort of angle and in this kind of position, because this is still within the area of sap flow. Now this is the first branch that I'm going to use as a whip in which to, or with which to perform the approach graft. Get the impression that at least some people think that approach grafting is not such a good technique because the branch angle as it emerges from the trunk is not really great. If my understanding is correct, then is that they're actually using this section to do the graft with, where in fact this is the section should be grafting with, and this area fusing with the trunk, but this is actually the branch that you need to use as the future structural branch. This is the area, or this is the spot that I've decided to graft, the first or the lowest branch, so this will be my primary branch. Now you ideally want to graft onto a surface that is swelling slightly, so a convex surface. And this is going to make it easier for you to cut a groove using your saw for the whip to lay in. So I'm just going to remove this growth from the inside, which would be up against the trunk, maybe just getting in the way a bit. And we can just check where this is going to go, and then also what the width is, this thickness here, because that is the size of the groove that I need to cut, and you want to cut it as snugly as possible. Another tip is that if you cut across like this, it is perpendicular to the sap flow, which means that this is going to fuse very much quicker than if you were to cut at an angle like this or at an angle like that. So using a very sharp, fine-toothed saw, I'm just going to make a groove, and remember, it needs to be the width of the whip. And you also want to make it deep enough so that the whip will sit flush with the surrounding tissue. So after making that initial cut, I like to go in with a grafting knife, a very sharp grafting knife, and just make those edges, recut those edges to make sure that it's as crisp a cut as possible. And this is just going to aid the grafting, the fusion of the graft that much quicker. As I said, you want, particularly with Trident maples, because their sap pushes so aggressively, it can actually pop the graft out. So it needs to be flush with the surrounding trunk or surrounding tissue. Now the next step in this process is to position the branch where you want it to be, and then I'm going to use a grafting pin, and I'm going to insert that grafting pin adjacent to the branch in that groove, and then using a panel hammer, which is just really a lighter hammer, I'm going to gently tap that in, and then on the front side as well, on the opposite side of the branch. Careful of the branch that you're actually wanting to keep, that you don't damage that. These are pins that I get from Japan. I'm not really sure what they're actually used for, but they work fantastically well for grafting. What they essentially are very thin nails with little rubber tubes on them. So you can make, if you can't find something like this, try and make something up, maybe just a nail, the thinnest nails that you can find, with a piece of tubing, maybe airline tubing from an aquarium store or something. The most important thing is that there cannot be any movement. If there's movement, then the branch will not fuse. So the most important thing is that you secure this whip in place so that it cannot move. If you want to, you can now apply a little bit of aluminium wire, which you can do very loosely, and this is really just going to point the branch into the general direction that you want it to go. You don't have to consider putting any major bends into it at this point in time. So just be very careful when doing this. You don't want to disturb your graft. Finally, I like to seal my grafts as well. Make sure that there's no air that gets in here, which would dry the tissue out, and therefore either slow down the fusing of the two pieces of material, or may even cause it to fail. You don't want to use something too thin here, because you don't want to get it into the graft itself and between the two bits of between the two cambiums where the fusion needs to take place. So you want to use something that's fairly thick. So you can see our first graft is now completed, and it's in the ideal position for a first or main branch. When you are done with your first graft, which will be the lowest one on the tree, you can then move up into the apical area and continuing to do more approach grafts. I've decided I'm going to remove this thick stub here. This was a branch that was still developing when the tree was growing in the ground. And but I've decided it's too thick really to be functional or to be usable. In this position, as high up as it is in the tree, and so I'm going to remove it, and then I'm just going to seal that, and we might get some branching developing, buds being activated around this point, but I might also just at the same time graft something in that position just to be safe. So I'm just going to use a saw to remove this branch, and then I will use a knob cutter to reduce the stub further. Now, late spring is actually a great time to be doing this kind of work, removing branches, because if you do it in the beginning of spring, the sap flow of these trees is so high that the callus formation is very aggressive and it tends to roll. So you can't really use that callus. But now, because sap flow is a little bit slower, it's now going to be a slower formation of callus, and therefore smoother as well, and then so we can use that. I'm just going to use a chisel and just gouge this out a little bit more. It can be slightly concave, and so that when so you allow provision for, or you make provision for the callus, which will raise the surface slightly. So if you actually want to raise the level, then you can leave it flat, and then the resulting scar will be slightly rounded. But if you want it flush with the surrounding area, then you need to hollow it out slightly. Okay, now I'm finished with carving or preparing this cut site, and now I'm just going to seal over it. I always seal cuts like this. It just protects the tree and results in the callus formation happening much quicker and much neater. Now, although I said that I can wait and hope that something else buds in this area, we can actually be a lot more certain about it, more deliberate, and graft something into this space. And in fact, that's going to give us a couple of years head start than if we were to wait for this to start forming callus and for a bud to activate. So I'm actually going to graft something into this space. So I've come to the most important graft, the one that I want to do most, and that is the one that is going to be the future trunk line. So I'm going to now perform that graft. Now, something else that you need to be mindful of is the internodal distances of the whip that you're grafting with, and positioning that internode in a way that makes it very usable for you. For instance, if you graft here, then we can use this as to develop the new trunk line from. Alternatively, if we position it here, we have a longer branch, a stronger branchlet that's developed this spring, and although that one would need to be wired into a better position. However, this section will then be, this full section of internode will then be inside the graft channel, so to speak, that I have created. Now, sometimes as well, because maple buds are opposite, you will then find that if you have a front or if you have a side branchlet developing here, you will have something on the other side. So that needs to be cleaned off so that it doesn't result in the graft being positioned further away or pronounced from the surface. So we just need to clean that up a little bit, and others can be positioned inside the groove that I've cut. While I'm going through the tree and doing some grafting, I'm also looking at the existing branches to see if those are actually usable. And as you can see, this branch has been wired down. Now, branches lower down on the tree should go down, and branches in the apical area are of course going to reach more towards the sunlight. So it's important this first angle of the branch that you get this correct. And with maples, you can't leave, or just the deciduous in general, you can't leave them too long, because once the branches become woody, it's going to be impossible to bend them down. And it's very important for this first angle to be correct. Although the branch will be cut back very short once it's thick enough, this branch obviously then will be developed for the coming years as a sacrificial branch to thicken up the base of it. But it's not attractive to have a branch that goes up and then comes down, which is very often the case if it's not attended to early on, as I'm doing now. Sometimes when the angle of the branch is incorrect and it's already become quite thick, it's not going to be possible to bend it. So I've cut this branch all the way back, but knowing that there are dormant buds at the base of this branch, and so these buds will now be activated, and then the resulting growth from this area can then be wired down. This branch was probably kept in order to help this wound just below it to callus over, which it has done very well. considering it's only been one season. With Trident maples, Chinese maples, which are quite aggressive healers or strong healers, you can see the amount of callus formation that has taken place just over a single growing season. So large scars like this that are left or created rather in the field growing process can rapidly be healed over just allowing a lot of sap flow in the tree, and this will be healed over in no time. So I've completed this. This was one of the grafts that I wanted to do, and this has been now successfully completed. I'm either going to use this vertical section or I'm going to use this younger branch. So I'll see where the tree develops or sends energy to, and then work with the strongest portion. So at this stage of development, when you're developing structural trees, it's always important to work with the tree. So where the tree is showing you that it wants to grow, in other words, a strong branch, work with the strong branch. Don't, even if it's not in the ideal position, then either you need to either readjust your design or you need to graft, but it's futile to work with a weak branch that is just not growing. More than likely not going to develop in a way or at a speed that you want it to do. So it's better to work with the tree, and then that changes, of course, when you get closer to refinement. Then you want to be working with weaker growth. You want to eliminate strong growth because you want to slow the tree down, and you don't want to keep explosive or coarse growth. You want to keep it very controlled and thin. But at this stage, very much development, structural development phase, and so we want a lot of sap flow. We want to work with a strong young growth. As I mentioned earlier on, this is dead here. The sap has receded down to this point where you can see it's greener here. But there is growth to the left of it and also to the back. And although I could cut that back, I'm rather going to leave it because I want sap flow into this area as much as possible, which will help this to fuse that much quicker or that much more aggressively. And then once the new leader, either, as I mentioned, either this one or this piece here, whichever one takes over, when it's strong enough, then I will be cutting this back and shaping that cut and then healing that over. If you found that content helpful and you'd like to thank me for it, please do so now by clicking the thanks button just below the video. It's very easy to become disheartened at this stage of development because it feels like the gains are so small. But what you'll find is that at the moment we're building a skeleton, a framework, and it's very important to get this correct. Otherwise, if we build on secondary and tertiary branches on that structural branch or network that we've developed and the structural branches are not correct, then we're going to be wasting years of work on what comes in the future. So it's very important to get this stage right. And as I said, this tree was collected from the field last season in spring. And so it's only been 1 year in the wooden box that I made for it. And so for the next few years, I'm going to be developing the structural branches, which means that I'm going to be growing branches like this on as sacrificial branches and then cutting them back again to stubs. And then, of course, the period of time between those cutbacks becomes shorter and shorter as I'm building up the taper in those structural branches. And so at this point in time, I'm not worried about ramification. I'm just looking for options when it comes to my structural branches. I've done a total of 7 approach grafts on this tree for the moment. And I can also expect a number of buds to form adventitiously on the trunk as well when exposed to sunlight. But grafting branches in positions that you know you're going to need them, and even actually more than what you think you will need, just keeps your options open, and it'll allow you to create a fuller canopy if you have more branches to work with in the structure. So that brings me to the end of today's workshop. The tree will now go back outside again and be placed in the same position that it was. and be cared for in the same way that it was before. Fertilizer fairly aggressively so that I can build my branch structure, the thickness thereof, and to heal over some of the wounds that were created in the field growing process. I expect in a month or so, depending on how fast the tree develops, the branches, the whips that I grafted with, how fast they develop. That will determine how fast the fusion happens between the whip and the trunk. But what you can do is to keep an eye on the branch as it exits from the trunk. If that appears or is obviously thicker than where it enters the trunk, then you know that it has fused, and then you can go to the next step, which is something that I will feature in a future video. So thanks very much for watching. I hope that you feel confident enough now to go and do approach grafting yourself if you've never done it before. It's an extremely useful technique for building up structural branch network on conifers as well as deciduous. Thanks very much for watching. I hope to see you again next Friday when I upload the next video. So until then, take care and goodbye.